But when I look back, it's quite amazing to me that I've actually been fishing this stretch of river now for probably about 23 years. When I was younger, I didn't think I'd ever do anything for 23 years, let alone fish the same bit of river. I've grown to love it, and really for me now, it's that old sort of saying really, when I leave the river, but the river never leaves me. I'm at home and the river's still sort of flowing through my head. I almost sort of have a relationship with this river, which may sound daft, but I just love it. I just love watching the changes. I love watching how the whole ecology of this place has changed over the course of the time that I've been here, the farming practices, and that's all part of what makes it so exciting. I get up in the morning and I have my cup of tea and I go off down the track, and the excitement's already there before we even got to the river, and always that first view of the river through the trees down across the valley is just, in some ways, probably the best moment of the whole day. However romantic that may sound, that's how it works for me. And then when I get down here, well, I have to get into the sort of intimacies of finding the fish and so on. Well, there's nothing so unpredictable as a river, or should I say the fish. In the morning we came down, went in one of my favourite swims, named after probably my favourite dog, and that's the last place I ever fished with my little Jack Russell, so it's a very special spot for me. Plenty of bait went in, we could see plenty of fish, but they really didn't want to play. I wonder whether it's still just the back end of spawning time really, because several of the chub still had a little bit of milk coming out of them, and most of the small fish were quite happy to play, whereas the big old adults, which I assume are the ones that are going to spawn the most, really didn't want to play. And the barbel, they just ignored me really. Generally speaking, fishing the Wye, particularly obviously my bit of the Wye, I do put a lot of bait in. I tend to find a lot of the time if you're just trickling a bit of bait in, the fish don't really take too much notice of it. So as you've probably watched before, I use a scoop, and I'm sure the sound of all that 8mm pellet going in, well, I know it attracts them because you can often see them sort of bow waving off the shallows towards it, and as there's a lot of fish, I tend to put a lot of bait in, and then I'll just quite happily put 1 or 2 pellets on a foot long, maybe 18-inch link, and then I'll just change the lead as and when the spots that I'm going fishing in, because virtually all of the time I'm fishing downstream to these fish. So the idea of a bolt rig or whatever, it doesn't really need it, because they just hook themselves against the rod. The rod usually just taps, then a bait runner goes off. You can't get anything much more positive than that. It was quite interesting really that the only barbel I caught in a swim that I know normally has lots of barbel in. And it's in a shallow area, so it's not an area where I'd expect the barbel to have gone miles to spawn. It's well known that coarse fish in rivers, they all move upstream to spawn in varying degrees. Barbel will certainly sometimes move quite a long way. And the simple reason for that is that they know if they had their eggs and their offspring where they were, any water that comes down, any powerful current, would just take the young away, and they obviously want to inhabit the area they started, so they'll move upstream to put the spawn down, and then over the course of probably the summer they all end up back pretty well where they started. That's just nature working. So interestingly, I wonder whether it was, as I was saying really, that it's the males that they've finished their business. You know what us men are like, you know, thanks very much, you know, I'm off to the pub now. So the males were willing to come back and play. The females, you almost get the impression they're just sitting somewhere, not sulking wouldn't be the right word, but just feeling a little bit the worse for wear and so on. And then once they do come on the feed, and bear in mind, you know, we're only 2 weeks into the start of the season, they'll probably just pile it on, because they're the ones that are going to put obviously the great deal of effort into the spawning, and they'll be way down in weight. So let's hope I'm there that day. So I decided that probably the best thing to do was simply rest that swim. Clearly they weren't impressed with me being around, so put some more pellet in and came down here to a much bigger swim, a much more open swim. It's quite sort of intimate, it's quite small, that gully I'm fishing in up there, where here's a huge, great big area. And normally this has probably got the biggest shoal of chub and barbel on my stretch. Well, this is a completely different spot, and I'm going to go for a completely different approach. This morning it worked okay, a few nice chub, one barbel, but not really quite enough for me, I'm afraid. So I'm going to come down here with a great big bucket of ground bait, and I'm going to ball a load of it in. I'm going to put a load of pellet in, and then I'm going to sit here with a couple of big feeder rods out. I just think I need a completely different approach. The river is not in its normal sort of mood, so something needs to change, and it's probably me. But even then, I came down here, went in for a completely different approach. Balls of ground bait, lots of boilies, more balls of ground bait, more boilies, start fishing. And sure enough, you know, both rods were tapping away quite often right at the beginning. But again, all the smaller fish. And it didn't matter how much more I got in, I couldn't trigger that reaction from the bigger fish, which is unusual. Sometimes when the river's low, which obviously is in the summer, or generally is in the summer, and it's clear, balling in the ground bait has sort of two effects really. One, it goes in and it's obviously breaking off the bottom and then leaving a lovely milky smelly cloud down in the flow, which obviously attracts the fish, but it also gives them a bit more cover. Equally then, once they come up and they start rooting around it, they start rooting the bottom up. So that's the reason why normally I just keep that process going, and I can keep the fish on the feed. But this morning there was very little difference in fishing here with that approach than there was fishing in the other swim. Clearly the river's not happy. I don't know whether we're building a high pressure, they really don't like that, or whether it is just still recovering from spawning. So it was obviously time to give them a bit of a break, come back with a fresh smile and a different approach. So I've had a little bit of a break and I wander up and down the river, which is always worth doing. I can't quite understand why people use fishing as an excuse to be by a river. You don't need an excuse, you just come and sit by a river, it's gorgeous. It's one of the loveliest places to be in the world, I think. I love it. I mean, here we've had the sound of the water ripping, we've got the sound of the wind in the trees, even just the soundtrack to it is just gorgeous. But back to the fishing, because I'm sure that's what you want to know about. I went back into that earlier swim, repeated exactly the same process, but oddly enough some better chub started to get into it then. And the unusual bit of that incident, that coincidence, is that normally once I get the chub down on the bait, the barbel will move in and push them off of it. Barbel are very aggressive feeders, but at the moment I'm not getting that response at all. You put more pellet in, you catch more chub. You put more pellet in, you catch more chub. The barbel are not moving on and kicking them out of the way. Again, that's just been saying really, they almost seem to be in a state of sort of lethargy at the moment really. That's not surprising. First thing in the season, quite often the barbel fish is not at his best, and often when you do succeed, it's with a moving bait, which, because I didn't get around to trying really. A bit stupid of me, because I actually love standing out in the river with my centre pin and the float. That probably would have been a more successful way to have approached it at the moment. Quite often at the start of the season, they're not quite so responsive to the bait, but I guess that's kind of understandable because they won't have seen any for the last 3 months, maybe more. I'm not sure whether that's been the problem on this trip. It's maybe if I'd fish shallower water, but there's no weed in this river. There hasn't been any weed in this river since we had a big flood a few years ago. And I think that makes things difficult. It makes it difficult for the fish because they like to spend their life, they spend their time in that weed when it's hot and sunny. They usually do after they've been spawning because it's nice and oxygenated. But they're not going to feel comfortable out there at the moment because they've got no cover. So we're in a kind of strange position, really. So then I was left in a strange position. Do I come back to the second swim where I put a lot of bait in? But that meant I had to walk past the swim that I power went in yesterday, just for a few hours last thing, and got quite a number of chub, and then right at the end caught one barbel. So clearly, barbel being a shoal fish, there wasn't just one sitting there, so I was very tempted to drop in that spot. So then I decided to come back down here because I'd put quite a lot of bait in. That usually works, certainly works here. And hopefully the bigger fish will have moved in onto the bait. It's an old-fashioned, I say old-fashioned, that makes poor old Mike Wilson, I think, first came up with the idea of a sort of baiting pyramid. He came up with this theory that if you put bait in somewhere, the first fish that will get on it will be the small, hungry fish. But then slowly, if you keep introducing bait, the bigger fish will arrive. And eventually, if you just keep putting bait in, you'll only end up with the bigger fish, if not the biggest fish. And I would kind of subscribe to that. It certainly works here. But it does mean you've got to be patient with building a swim. So it was interesting to come back. And as soon as I put the ground bait in, as soon as I put the boilies in, as soon as the feeders were in, the rod tips were nodding around. And other than one, every single chub that I've caught down here since has probably been £5 plus. And suddenly I'm a happy man. I've left Chub City for a moment and found barbel land. I can't believe I've got so many chub today. I had to move about. The river's in a funny old mood, but suddenly we're both feeling much better. Well, whoa. A beautiful little male barbel, still looking all resplendent. He probably only spawned 2 or 3 weeks ago. Oh, cheeky devil! I love it. That wasn't so bad for either of us, was it? That to me is the most beautifully built for purpose fish probably in the whole world, but certainly in this country. Just look at it, splendid. The whole thing's just built to just sit on the bottom. Lovely great big pecks, and that tail with the rounded bottom, which presumably is where he wears it away on the bottom, that lovely pointy tip. Not great glorious colours or anything, just absolutely built for purpose. Lovely. But then when the barbel turned up, it was the little males again. So I just don't think the females are about here still. I think, maybe they're still sitting wherever they've been spawning or whatever. Well, it's a lovely sort of scenario, which I love. That's part of the reason I love fishing, because I'm always trying to solve some sort of problem like this. But that bit held true. The fact that I'd put that amount of bait in, when I came back, the bigger fish had moved onto it. And I've had some really nice chub this afternoon with 3 nice barbel sprinkled in amongst them. Oh. So sort of 2 other points really, vaguely to do with the fishing, certainly to do with fishermen, that I'd like to just bring up. How did I end up with the scar on my nose? How did I end up with this, scab, the scar on my face? The sun. My generation just never took the sun seriously enough. There's that wonderful record about sunscreen, isn't it? I love that record. But hey, listen, if you don't want to end up getting bits cut off your face because you've sat out in the sun too long, get onto the sunscreen. Which probably just leaves me really to the usual sort of bucket list. You know, I still love this expression, bucket list. Somebody since has told me, yeah, it's things you want to get done before you kick the bucket. Apparently that's how it originates, this pretty morbid sort of idea. So the interesting thing about my bucket list this time, I've got my little bucket, and of course I've got my bottle of wine in it, and I've got my glass and my bottle opener. But the lovely thing is, this isn't just me sitting down here having a glass of wine, which I shall do as the sun dips down. My two favourite rivers are the River Wye and the River Dynamite, and this is like a sort of confluence between the two with me, because I've bought this wine from the Dynamite, and I'm now going to sit by the River Wye and I'm going to drink it and have a very pleasant evening, and all of you just thoroughly enjoy the countryside and your fishing.